Please take your seats. We like to save the best for last, and we've had some really compelling keynote talks at the summit. We had a science lecture from the National Medal of Science honoree, Dr. Rudolf Janisch, on Monday morning. We heard from Andy Grove, former chairman of Intel, that really shook our world, and his talk was so hugely and well received. He, backstage, told me that he had never received a thunderous reception like the one he had at our meeting. He's such a curmudgeon, apparently. He didn't expect that people would actually appreciate the idea that we have to work hard and push hard and change the way we regulate things, break the eggs to make this happen. So we, of course, we're thrilled to have him. Of course, yesterday we heard from Chris Mason and Gil Van Bachlen, two visionaries and architects of the emerging stem cell industry, regenerative medicine industry, and cell therapy industry. We had a wonderful keynote address from Larry Goldstein on Monday as well. And we have really had momentum. It's not often that you get to hear from a major general. And James Gilman, General Gilman, reported that he was absolutely delighted from the media exposure for representing the U.S. Army's investment in this field. So we've come down to the final sessions on Stem Cell Awareness Day as it's celebrated all around the world. And it's absolutely fitting and appropriate that as our final keynote address, we'll be hearing from our friend Bob Klein. Bob is going to speak on new government and philanthropic paradigms for funding stem cell research. Of course, in the state of California, Bob needs no introduction. He is, besides being an absolutely passionate advocate for diabetes research and a leader in JDRF, he, of course, is the founder of the Proposition 71 campaign, from which emerged, after a vigorous campaign and a ballot measure that created the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. And as we all know, without Bob's huge energy, support, passion, investment of personal funds, sacrifice, he created out of nothing, an experiment, a major funding agency from a state for the new field of stem cell research and the future of medicine. This is an historical achievement for which Bob is only beginning to be recognized. It was unprecedented in American history, and I have to stop and just say we ought to give him an initial applause right now for his contribution. We've had an extraordinary 3 days here, and this meeting would not be in California were it not for Bob Klein, that has made this into the stem cell capital of the world, the state of California. So I consider him a great friend, personal friend, a friend of our movement, a friend of patients around the world. So now I introduce my friend Bob Klein.
Thank you, Bernie. We are all indebted to you from the very beginnings of the stem cell revolution for your heroic efforts in protecting the global researchers from a ban at the United Nations, for which your efforts were legendary, and we were privileged to collaborate with you on that. But it takes all of us here, and in the current financial crisis facing the world, it will take all of us and then some to drive this revolution in medicine through these difficult times. The current financial crisis in U.S. and Europe I expect to crush the traditional appropriations funding approaches. At the very best, we might be able to hold close to the current levels, but in real dollars, over a period of years, we can see those actual funding opportunities declining with inflation. Because the fight for resources will never have been more difficult. But in California, we have Proposition 71, and the fundamental question one could ask is, so why am I so focused on new paradigms in funding? Proposition 71, of its original $3 billion, has committed $1.4 billion approximately, attracted $1 billion in matching funds, and it will have enough funding to take it through mid-2017 for funding commitments, with the ability for those commitments to stretch out to 2020. It costs $100 billion a year just to keep victims of polio in iron lungs in buildings designed only for that purpose. All of that cost for 50 years has been avoided. There was an investment in the intellectual capital, the intellectual property to cure those patients or to avoid the disease, and that has been a long-term benefit. And we should be issuing bonds that spread the cost of that intellectual capital development over these long benefit periods, not trying to fund it on the backs of the current taxpayer. Because as we all know, it's a decade before you get really the beginnings of the benefit of the investment, which is why in the first 5 years of California's Proposition 71, in the model, I capitalized the interest, so there were no general fund payments by the people of California during the first 5 years. And the revenue created by the new jobs will carry the general obligation bond payments in California through approximately the 9th year. We really need to think and advocate for capital structures that spread the cost and align the cost over the period that benefits. So if we're going to have pressure on national models for bonds or state models, where can we go? Well, in 2006, Gordon Brown and Bill Gates got together, and they launched a program called the IFFIM, the International Facility for Financing Immunizations. They were looking at the capital cost of knocking out tuberculosis in the developed world, in the underdeveloped world. And they issued $5 billion of bonds through the World Bank. Now, that issuance was supported by pledges from individual countries. So you have a situation where the countries didn't have to issue the bonds. The World Bank issued the bonds. Yet the countries could make individual contributions that were appropriations under a long-term contract, so that the funding was not an appropriations model that hit them with the cost all up front. The funding was spread over 20-plus years. The value to developed nations of spreading their cost over a large number of years in this budget cycle, in these budget times, is immense. And certainly, science is international. Why not adopt a model that's been proven? Why not go to an international level and see if we can supplement the NIH funding, supplement California's funding? This is not a paradigm or an example or a model to replace the existing financing resources, but to realize those existing resources will be under immense pressure. And to supplement those resources, the agency that runs this under contract with the World Bank could operate just like CIRM does, as a public corporation, a global public corporation with peer review, with all the processes we've put in place for CIRM, with recusals when a scientist from a particular nation was up for consideration on a grant or a loan. So I would suggest by looking outside our national models, we might be able to find in this difficult time period a way to expand by billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars after a test period, a new funding resource that will be very important as a bridge to a time when the economies of the world are in better shape and national funding is really more realistic. It is, however, critical for us when we're looking at the funding structures to get from where we are, to get from being able to fund up to an IND or a phase 1 human trial, and how are we going to get through the phase 2 trials? How are we going to get to commercialization? With CIRM, we have a limited amount of funds where we can get through phase 2A or 2B human trials to where companies can see that they have a short enough time period that they can actually sell the capital markets on taking that risk with a new therapy. But the capital markets, you have to understand, are hugely risk adverse in this climate. So that's a very small window for a limited number of therapies that are going to get a good reception. We need some major economic drivers, and one of our problems in fully engaging biotech or pharma is that the capital model for an interventionist stem cell therapy that substantially mitigates disease or in fact cures someone through an interventionist therapy really breaks the current model under their business plan. Look at Lipitor. Look at long-term cancer therapies. They're chronic therapies or they're long-term treatments to prevent the development of a condition. They're a long-term income stream. If you come in with a new approach to kidney disease that cures the kidney disease, how are you going to be able to lay all of that cost up front on a single therapy or a limited number of therapies? How many diseases can the US budget or Germany's budget or Canada's budget take and afford to make massive front-end payments on? Right? So you have stem cell transplants for leukemia. If you had stem cell transplants for 40 diseases, what's that going to do if it has to be a front-end payment? What's going to happen is there won't be enough resources, and you're going to get severe rationing or limitations on what conditions can be addressed. That is not aligned with our goal to treat diseases with the best science that humanity can bring to bear. So as a potential new paradigm, I suggest to you that we can look to the Department of Defense, which in the United States has a cost savings formula that they did experiments with. They essentially said to defense contractors, if you save a percentage of this new military system, we'll share with you in those savings. Now think about the implications of that and ignore for a moment the fact that they limited the savings to a very short period of years and they capped it at such a small amount of money that the transaction costs for most military contractors weren't worth dealing with it. But redesign the program so it works. If you say to biotech, the federal government will approve contingent compensation contracts, you design what disease you're going to treat, how you're going to treat it. If you are successful in substantially mitigating the disease or curing the disease, we will give you a percentage of the savings for 30 years or 40 years. What happens? You've unleashed hundreds of billions of dollars. Why? Why can't the Congress do that right now? Why can't they just appropriate the money? Because we have a pay-go Congress, as they will in Germany and France and United Kingdom. Essentially, a pay-go Congress means you have to cut a cost to make an appropriation, or you have to raise taxes to make an appropriation, which I think is not too popular. What we really need to understand here is by signing federal contracts that are subject to the performance of the company on reducing medical costs as soon as criteria are met. In kidney disease, is the stem cell therapy providing a repair so the individual doesn't have to be on dialysis? Or have we averted it going to that point? The proteins in the blood are much lower, right? Can we see indicators along the way that we could set with good scientific reviews that we are avoiding things like age-related macular degeneration? Can we create a compensation system where companies can take these contracts and as soon as they start to see positive results on adoption and efficacy, they can start borrowing against them? And as the population using it increases, they can borrow more. What does that do for the company? What that means for the company is that if they can borrow on a federal contract, they can borrow long-term at a very low rate, and they can replace extraordinarily expensive venture capital up front. What does that mean? That means that now they can take a risk on a broader number of diseases. Now maybe they can take a risk on ALS, which is a small population. Now maybe they can take a risk on a bigger portfolio because they have a business model to deal with stem cell research that gives them an exit plan. Because right now they don't have that business model, and there's a lot of skeptics out there that says, what are you going to do, charge $1 million a therapy? Who's going to pay that up front? How can any medical system afford that for a broad range of diseases? We have to look downstream as we celebrate the discoveries that are milestones in knowledge and moving towards therapies. We have to look downstream to a new paradigm to create a business model that can really incentivize business with hundreds of billions of dollars of potential payments spread over a long time period, spread over 30 or 40 years, spread over the benefit period. So effectively, those generations that are getting the benefit of improved quality of life and or lower cost are paying that out of a portion of the savings. I suggest to you that getting the current Congress of the United States to raise taxes to fund more research is not probable. But getting the current Congress of the United States to look at a program where you can take a percentage of the savings and pay that to a company under a long-term contract where the companies are all competing to see who can create a therapy that will reduce human suffering and save the government money, you've done something remarkable. Currently, the business interests of biotech, because of the existence of the current business model, are aligned with creating a long-term therapy. There are a lot of great people in biotech who really want to cure people, but we put them into a quandary because their economic interests are rewarded if they create a long-term therapy, not if they create an interventionist therapy or a vaccine, which they may develop a vaccine out of stem cell research. But that's not their incentive. You can't, in fact, get a business model to do a number of vaccine opportunities that are known today. So we have to create a business model that really motivates them to a large scale. And under this model, we've realigned the interest of biotech to be the same as the patients, to be the same as the scientists, to be the same as the government. Your ultimate goal is to cure, or if not, at least substantially mitigate. So I would suggest to you that expanding the bond model, the new paradigm of California's Prop 71, such as the adoption in Texas of a $3 billion bond finance program, such as the Third Frontier program in Ohio, which included biotech funding, is fundamentally an important goal, but we have to go the extra mile and look at how we're going to get to commercialization and what the business model would be for commercialization. And additionally, as we expand the bond financing to spread the cost of research over the generations that benefit and create the new business model, we will find that we've then leveraged an entire new group of donors, both institutional donors and private individual donors. Why? Because they will understand that these new paradigms leverage their money. These new paradigms give them the answer of where's the money going to come from to take it to patients. These new models give them the answer of in tight fiscal times, how are we going to get research budgets to even survive? With this knowledge, with the idea that they can really leverage their money, there's someone downstream to carry them, then the donors can put up major dollars, much larger, quantum levels larger donations they're doing now, with the confidence that they are driving a legacy investment that can improve the human condition. Today, in today's economy, donors are skeptical. Donors don't believe the downstream dollars will be there. Donors are cutting their commitments. Where did the $1 billion in matching funds come for CIRM's facilities? Where did that come from? 2008, 2009? Are you kidding me? It came because they saw a model that would take at least through phase 2A, 2B efficacy, where they thought companies could potentially pick up these therapies and carry them forward to patients. To the extent that we create new paradigms for funding the research up front, for the extent we put a new business model together for Congress where they can actually vote for something that will contractually commit this country to hundreds of billions of dollars to really cure or substantially mitigate disease on a performance basis, we have also changed the game for donors, and the seed money that's so critical up front for high-risk experiments, for brilliant new ideas, can be magnified many times over. So the question then is, where are we going to get the political will for any new program? Forget the fact that it's rational. Because we have to realize the media environment we're living in, that Congress lives in, that the state governments live in, and that media environment we live in is relatively devoid in the public media of information on what you do, whether scientists or advocates. If we look at what's happened between 1998 and 2005, we find that 65% of all of the science writers in this country were fired. But that was just the beginning. What's happened since then? Well, in 2008, CNN laid off its entire science and technology staff. So how are we going to get the message out there and mobilize the public to support biotech, to support new funding models? The San Jose Mercury said 2 decades ago there were 150 papers with science sections. Today there are 20 left. The U.S. National Association of Science Writers has 3,000 members remaining. Only 70 are full-time. Chris Mooney, in his book Unscientific America, said that for every 5 hours of cable TV news, less than 1 minute is devoted to science. 46% of Americans, he said, reject evolution and think that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old. 25% believe that the sun rotates around the Earth. We have a remarkable task in front of us. But with Proposition 71, we handled a very tough subject. We put scientists on the television. We mobilized the patient advocates. Clearly, this was impossible to pass $6 billion of authorization, $3 billion for the research and $3 billion to pay the interest on the bonds for 35 years. Clearly impossible to do. Patient advocates and scientists got together, and it happened. We have a huge job to do. You are the revolution. Scientists and advocates in this room are leaders in the stem cell revolution, on which this revolution is incredibly dependent. And we must get the scientific communities in every media market, in every state, in every country, to reach out. Don't wait for someone to interview you for a discovery. You've got to go to the media and educate them on science. Recently, there was someone who had covered the California agency, stem cell agency, for 7 years. We said, when are you going to write a positive article? I didn't say this. John Thomas said this. What about this tremendous scientific report we just got on all the things that have been achieved? What about these great milestones? And the answer was, I'd love to write it, but I don't understand the science. We have to realize that we have to aggressively go out there and educate. Now, I understand that in an advanced industrial society or a post-industrial society, that you are rewarded for specialization, and in few areas you're rewarded more than in science. Even the advocates are specialized. But we have to realize that we have to aggressively engage the media in this country so that there's a broad public understanding of the value of this stem cell revolution to every family and every child in this country, or we're going to get run over by this financial crisis. And that engagement needs to start yesterday, because we all have promises to keep and miles to go before we sleep. Because we are the hope of an entire generation. We're the hope that in this narrow window of opportunity, a revolution in medical care will not be crushed by an economic cycle. Because we, you and I, have children and families and people who we would give our every breath to rescue from suffering that may, within a decade, be largely unnecessary. Thank you.
Bob Klein for president. The hero of the revolution. Can we bring up our next panel, please? Thank you, Bob, for those inspiring words. And a vision. And a vision.